I'm going to talk about what I believe to be two exciting possibilities for the role of the internet and particularly social media in democratic participation. First, about how the movement of so much social activity onto social media is going to help us understand the dynamics of collective action and civic engagement. And second, how it could extend the scale and scope of civic engagement. After all, the internet as a format for social, economic, political organization was something that Manuel was excited about way before the internet actually existed. So it only seems appropriate to put forward a couple of ways that that excitement carries on now that technology has caught up with him. In industrialized nations, so much of life for many people now takes place online. Working, eating, shopping, dating, entertainment, committing crime, socializing, making travel plans, and even things that in general people enjoy slightly less, like political participation, have moved to online settings. After years of bemoaning the disaffection of young people, new forms of democratic engagement seem to be on the increase, and a huge range of types of engagement, from the things that the first speaker was talking about to what we're going to talk about later, to mass protests in the wake of austerity, to a whole range of possible citizen interactions with government. All this online activity provides us with new ways, provides us as social scientists with new ways to understand the dynamics of political participation and collective action. It injects into the social sciences huge tranches of data, so-called big data, which is the kind of data we only used to dream about. We used to think only scientists can have this sort of thing. So, for example, I'm showing this not as I expect it to become immediately obvious what this tells us, but because this is an example of that sort of data. This is what citizens on the internet, this is a picture of citizens on the internet engaging with the UK state. This is data, this represents 8,000 joining curves of petitions to the number 10 Downing Street website during 2009 to 10. The website where people submitted these petitions is probably the largest non-partisan democracy site ever. During the 4 years it existed, it's been replaced now by a similar platform, there are 8 million signatures from 5 million unique email addresses. That's about 10% of the UK population. One of the petitions to this site collected 1.8 million signatures and has been admitted, privately at least, by civil servants to have actually been responsible for a controversial policy on road pricing to be reversed. This data was generated by scraping that site, non-obtrusively by my research team, scraping that site every day. We're now scraping that site every hour because it isn't fine-grained enough for what we want to do. We will be able, I hope, one of the interesting things that this tells us immediately, the kind of blue lines there, the kind of more scattered lines there, are the petitions that actually succeed even on the very modest measure of success of getting 500 signatures, which is what you need for an official response. Most of them fail. That's this red block of colour below. The dark block of colour is the 95% of petitions that actually fail even to get 500. Looking at that data, analysing that data, enables us to be able to work out what are the characteristics of the few that succeed, where are the tipping points, what is it that means some mobilisation will reach a critical mass for success. So I reckon that graph shows the first exciting thing I want to talk about, that it's a kind of new dawn for social science. We've never seen data like that. Unlike survey data, the traditional meat of social sciences, this is data about what people really did, not what they think they did or what they think they might do. Any political scientist here will know that if you try and recreate an election result from a survey of what people voted, you won't be able to do it. People can't remember what they voted. They often can't remember whether they voted or not, or they like to think they did. I could show you lots of other pictures like this. One of our colleagues, for example, has mapped the entire Twitter network of the Indignados protests in Spain. And it doesn't come, I mean, it's kind of pretty, but what does it mean? It presents a massive challenge to the social sciences, the kind of challenges that scientists have always had to deal with. We don't know where these people came from this graph, nor where they are going. We don't know anything about them. They don't come with handy demographics attached. But I still believe that if we can start to use this data, start to develop ways to analyze it, we can link data up across platforms, across Twitter, Facebook, and democracy platforms like the petitions site, and we can start to understand new things about political behavior. It's not just good news for social scientists, it's good news for policy making as well. All this data could give us a much better understanding of, give policymakers a much better understanding of citizens' behavior, their preferences, their needs. It gives government information about how people use hospitals, schools, tax, social welfare. It could give information on what kind of initiatives could make up civil society, so-called big society. It shows what people are willing to do in terms of acting collectively. It can be used to match policy to preferences. I'm now going to move on. That was what citizens, a snapshot of what citizens look like on the internet. This is what government looks like on the internet. This is the UK government's web presence. The lines represent links between websites. You can't see very well there, but they're different colors according to which direction they go in and whether they're reciprocated. Again, I believe that that data is exciting because we've never had a picture of government like that before. Something which maps governmental structure like that, which enables us to say which departments link to which other departments. The size of the grey blobs there represents the size of the electronic presence of that part of government. It enables us to say how outward-looking, how visible or invisible, how extrovert or introverted individual organizations are. And if we look at it another way, again, I'm not expecting you to interpret that, but the different colors on that graph show which subgroups of government are connected to each other, and therefore where it's easier for citizens to go and where it's not easy for citizens to go. We're mapping 7 governments like that, hoping to make some assessments of how basically easy it is for citizens to engage with those. So that's citizens on the internet and governments on the internet. The first graph showed people signing petitions. It's one of the most frequently undertaken acts of political participation after voting, certainly in the UK. They're individual acts of participation. They're not mobilizations exactly. There's maybe some kind of group or collective around the initiation of petitions, but in general, it's an individual participatory act. And when they're online, these tend to be spread virally through existing social networks. It's also a particular sort of engagement. We're not talking the Arab Spring here or Smash the State, but it is a confrontational engagement. Similar sort of acts of confrontation would be organized campaigns by online interest groups such as 38 Degrees in the UK or Avaz, a more global one. Ministers take those groups very seriously now. They adjust policy making according to what they're doing. The UK government reversed a decision. Well, they've reversed many decisions, actually, but they reversed one to privatise forests based on the activities of the groups 38 Degrees. Again, that's confrontational. But more collaborative policy making would be citizens providing government with rankings, with ratings, with feedback, with comments or policy ideas. And those things are also possible in this world. Citizens are willing to do that. One of the participatory acts that has leapt in the Oxford Internet Survey to be just behind petitions is posting political content or sending a political email via social media. 9% of UK citizens now do both of those activities. People are willing to do those kinds of things online, those things that we know they do very willingly with respect to private goods. We know that, or other sorts of collective goods, that we know they do that on YouTube, that's how TripAdvisor works. It's a big part of Amazon. But they are also willing to do that in terms of political activity. The more that they do it, the more that kind of activity could lead to a kind of co-creation of public policy, of public services. Citizens entering the front office of government through online means, as Patrick Dunleavy and I put forward in the digital era governance model, and are now developing as the essentially digital governance model. But in many countries, I'd even say most countries, we're not quite at the point where we could do that. That's because this set of online activity, this one, government, is not keeping pace with the first set, the citizens. Government has tended to lag far behind citizens in its use of social media. In fact, the internet in general and social media in particular are sort of the first technologies where citizens and social enterprises are innovating far faster than government. Governments have had information systems and computer systems for around 60 years. You could say it's the diamond jubilee of government computer systems. But these are internal to government administration. They're not creating these networks of direct communication linkages as current social media. So citizens are doing innovative things online, and in general, governments are not keeping up with them. But there are some exciting indications of government starting to try. The UK government, for example, the new government digital service in the UK has just released its guidelines to civil servants for using social media. And these guidelines, I mean, hardly any government departments or agencies actually do use very much social media at the moment, although some of them do. But these are more encouraging, as the Minister for the Civil Service put it. When civil servants, policymakers and service delivery units open themselves to dialogue with the public, they can gain a much better understanding of the real needs and concerns of citizens. It is encouragement to use these media. There have been some interesting examples of success. The government digital service have a digital engagement strategy, which is to involve citizens and governments collaborating in policy development and service design. They cite the spending challenge, which attracted 36,000 users and more than 45,000 ideas on how the government could cut public spending. There's other examples with similar numbers. Actually, they're quite small when you compare them to the petitions activity that I showed you earlier. But there are individual instances of where these things can take off. Recently, a blogger, sort of lone blogger from the Department for International Development, published pictures of trees in Pakistan covered in cobwebs due to the scale and persistence of flooding. Those pictures went completely viral. They attracted over 500,000 views on Flickr and were republished in over 50 media outlets all over the world. It can happen. But those kinds of initiatives do face still massive cultural resistance. The informality, the lack of organisational boundaries, the different style, the lack of control that government officials have to sign up to, all those things are hard for them to cope with. In Canada, the Treasury Board Secretariat has also published guidelines on external use of Web 2.0, but they were 18 pages long, extremely formal, and very criticised in the media for that reason. Most departments in Canada had already been sort of going rogue and using social media in the way of the example I've just suggested. So the guidelines were more about sort of stopping people doing that rather than encouraging them to do it. In 2009, which is not so very long ago, we wrote a report on the UK Department of Work and Pensions and noted that 0.2% of the massive department's interactions actually took place online, although their customers include the vast majority of the population. At a time when half of UK citizens are on Facebook and there's 7 million Twitter users, the central portal of government, the biggest kind of blob there, direct.gov, has 38,000 followers on Twitter and has had 5,500 likes expressed in the 2 years that it's had a Facebook presence. If there was a dislike button on Facebook, of course, that might be a bit larger. But only 500 comments for the posts it's had in 2 years. It's good that it's there, and some of those, if you look at any of that, it shows you some of the potential for government on social media, but these numbers are a bit hopeless. But I'd just like to end by saying it would be worth it. Using social media effectively to reach out, to really engage with citizens where they are already carrying out a lot of their lives, including their political lives, will be a key way in which the kind of exciting possibilities of social media for democratic participation could carry on. Governments across the world are now turning to digital by default strategies to deliver public services at lower cost. But they won't receive real policy engagement. They won't see the sort of crowdsourcing and co-creation that I've been talking about. And incidentally, they won't save money in the way that they hope unless they really go to where citizens are, to what citizens are doing online, instead of expecting citizens automatically to come to them. And finally, just to end, they need to capitalize on the kind of big data that I was talking about at the beginning. Some of us social scientists are incredibly excited about it. The private sector is exploiting the value of big data to a huge extent. But governments have been rather slower to think about the possibilities for policy making here. In 1998, just before the internet really took off, the political anthropologist James Scott wrote a book, Seeing Like a State, where he bemoaned the tendency of states to impose high modernist, top-down hierarchical plans on their citizenries and governments and environments. So if they dare, I think the internet, and particularly social media, would allow governments to move away from this model. By using big data, accepting the blurred boundaries between government and society that's inevitably going to emerge on social media, being agile enough to work with the kind of massive shifts that occur between social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, all these things, Facebook itself, all come out of nowhere, rise to prominence very, very quickly, and then there can be massive shifts between them. That means government being very agile to cope with that. If governments can do all those things, I think it might be the secret to seeing like a citizen rather than seeing like a state. Thank you.